Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Catholic Arena podcast. This is Jerome, and I'm joined as always by Augustine. And tonight we're going to actually talk about, it's a very topical item, about the upcoming consecration to Russia of the Immaculate Heart. So this stems back from a private revelation in the Fatima visions to the three little children, Jacinta and Francisco, and the third one I can't recall right now, but it's
Lucia.
we're gonna Lucia, yes, and we're going to talk about like this first, like why wasn't it done before to this time? Of course, it's very timely now, and of course, I mean possibly the schism comes into this as well, in some sort of tangential way. So hello, Augustine, how are you doing this evening?
Good. And I suppose talking about the consecration of Fatima, one of the reasons we're talking about it is that it's very controversial because, first and foremost, it's a private revelation, which means that, strictly speaking, the laity get some leeway in terms of their the extent to which they might be required to believe in it, or they might be required to adopt its message. Now, that's, some people might find that controversial, but generally with private revelation, it's the church has always stressed that it still has the authority over the interpretation of it. So with this one, more than any other one, a lot of people will like to implement their own interpretation of Fatima, and so with this consecration of Russia to the Immaculate Heart of Mary, a lot of people are either doubting how valid it is and saying that it's not authentic because they're saying that it doesn't follow the exact formula that was put in place by Our Lady to Sister Lucia. And other people then, will go down other routes and they'll say, well, it was actually done according to Our Lady's wishes by Pope John Paul in the 80s. And then other people will say, well, Pope Francis isn't Pope, so it doesn't count. It is controversial, but the majority of people, I think, will kind of see this for what it is, that it's a prayer which asks Our Lady in a special way to intercede, and not just for Russia, because Russia is important, but also one of the things linked to it is the errors of Russia. And the errors of Russia are not distinctly Russian these days. So the errors of Russia, of course, were abortion and atheism and communism. And so these aren't strictly Russian things these days. So in part, that's part of the consecration too, that the errors that came from the Russian Revolution, which of course was the same year as Our Lady appearing at Fatima, that's a big part of it too. And I suppose, just for anyone who hasn't heard it, Sister Lucia had a diary where she took note of all of this, and she says that, just to read it from it here now, just kind of on what she says, she kind of elaborates on how the consecration was to bring peace to the world. And of course, we know this, she was having the visions originally before the end of World War One, but then again there were other visions, other messages from Our Lady before World War Two. And I'm just going to read a part of it, of what she wrote, which she says, one day I went to Jacinta's house to spend a little while with her. I found her sitting on her bed, deep in thought. Of course, Jacinta was her sister. About the war that is coming. So many people are going to die, and almost all of them are going to hell. So a lot of people don't like this message, obviously, because of that. Many homes will be destroyed, and many priests will be killed. Look, I am going to heaven, and as for you, when you see the light which the lady told us would come one night before the war, you run up there too. Don't you see that nobody can just run off to heaven? That's true, you cannot, but don't be afraid. In heaven, I'll be praying hard for you, for the Holy Father, for Portugal, so that the war will not come here, and for all priests. And of course, one of the mentions of it, of course, is that there was an aurora borealis which occurred just before World War II broke out, which was a big part of it. And she also says in another part of her diary that the message from Our Lady was, you have seen hell, where the souls of poor sinners go. To save them, God wishes to establish in the world devotion to my Immaculate Heart. If what I say to you is done, many souls will be saved, and there will be peace. The war is going to end, but if people do not cease offending God, a worse one will break out during the pontificate of Pius XI. When you see a night illumined by an unknown light, know that this is the great sign given you by God, that he's about to punish the world for its crimes, by means of war, famine, and persecutions of the Church and the Holy Father. To prevent this, I shall come to ask for the consecration of Russia to my Immaculate Heart and the communion of reparation on the first Saturdays. If my requests are heeded, Russia will be converted and there will be peace. If not, she will spread her errors throughout the world, causing wars and persecutions of the Church. The good will be martyred, the Holy Father will have much to suffer, various nations will be annihilated. In the end, my Immaculate Heart will triumph. The Holy Father will consecrate Russia to me, and she will be converted, and a period of peace will be granted to the world. In Portugal, the dogma of the faith will always be preserved. Do not tell this to anybody. Francisco, yes, you may tell him. And then it says, Our Lady instructs her, to pray after each mystery of the Rosary. Oh my Jesus, forgive us, save us from the fires of hell, lead all souls to heaven, especially those who are most in need. So part of the message is that the Pope will perform a consecration. So some people think, oh, this is not going to happen and nothing will ever be good enough. But part of the message is that there will be a consecration with the bishops of the world. So that's why I'd fall under the category of those who are hopeful that this consecration is the right one. And it's one of the messages in the diary, one of the footnotes, is that Louis XVI apparently had a similar, there was a similar vision in the 18th century, and Louis XVI was asked to consecrate France to the Sacred Heart, and apparently he only found out about this while he was in prison and promised to do it while he got out, but it was too late. So anyway, but a lot of people with this message are, they're very torn, because some people think there's a lot of specific requests in there, but ultimately it does say that the Pope will consecrate Russia to the Immaculate Heart.
Why do you? So I guess this happened during the reign of Benedict XV, the Fatima visions.
Yeah, so in 1917, the thing to remember, so it would have been, yes, but I suppose the thing to remember about her diary was that she kept her diary even throughout the subsequent decades.
Oh,
So
okay.
some of it would have been through the reigns of other popes. So yeah, I think that's the kind of one to remember.
Okay. And there was controversy, I guess St. Pope John Paul II, did he actually do it? Did he say he did it? And if he did he, I don't know, there's some controversy there. Are you
Well,
aware of that?
yeah, well, some people will argue that because the bishops of the world weren't physically present with him, that it wasn't exactly what was required. Now, you see, the problem here is, okay, there's two parts to it, which is fair enough. People are saying, well, it's quite clear what's contained in it. But the other part is that Sister Lucia herself had apparently said that that consecration had been accepted. It was a different type of consecration to what we're seeing now, in that this consecration will be one where the bishops will join the Pope at the same time. Whereas with the other one, it was implicit. So this will be explicit, that the bishops are going to say, all right, I'm doing it at the same time as you. We're all joining in. Whereas before it was implicit. It was said that the bishops joined with the Pope in spirit, which, okay, I can understand why people were a little bit critical of that, because they were saying, well, sure, how are we going to know for definite? But it looks like this time it is explicit, if that makes sense.
Yes. What I was thinking of about the weekend in West between the Catholic Church in Rome, basically, and what you can call the the Orthodox Christian Church that is, you could say, historically based in Constantinople or Greece or that side of the world. Did Our Lady, is part of the intention of this consecration is not only um, to get all Russians to become fully Christian, but even more ambitious than that is to actually become Catholic again.
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting one, and it's probably the main bone of contention with the whole idea of the consecration is that a lot of Russians will say, well, we've become a Russian nation again, or we are a Christian nation. And they'll say, this is offensive, and they'll say, especially because we've always held Our Lady in such high regard, in the Orthodox Church. To be totally honest, it's never been the biggest. I don't think it's ever been the most talked about interpretation, even though it seems a very obvious one, actually, doesn't it? That
Yeah.
um, you have the split between the Orthodox and the Catholic. But yeah, interestingly enough, I wouldn't be that familiar with much of the talk in it. Like a lot of the talk that I've read is either related to, as I said, A, abortion, because Russia was the first place to legalize abortion in 1917, or B, communism, which of course Russia, like obviously Russia didn't necessarily begin communism. You could say it started in the industrial parts of Britain and Germany, but nonetheless, it was Russia who spread the communist ideas around the world. Um, and then the last one, then, like, there's so many other interesting interpretations then related to the church. Like, Fulton Sheen had a very interesting one where he talked about how, um, if you the like Fatima in Portugal was named after the daughter of the last sultan, and she married a Catholic, and her name was Fatima. And of course, Muhammad's daughter's name was Fatima. And the interesting interpretation that Fulton Sheen has is that he thinks there's a message in there about Islam. Now, if we think of Fatima as a very wide ranging, broad message, of course, it could include something about the Orthodox, something about communism. And then, of course, maybe Fulton Sheen could be right in saying there's something about Islam. If you think of what he was saying was that he thinks that be something about the Muslims will be converted through the message of Our Lady, and about. I mean, I don't know if was it during World War Two. It was relatively recently, anyway, that there was the uh, visions of Our Lady, apparition of Our Lady in Egypt, which is one of the most interesting ones because there's actually photographs of it, and lots of Muslims saw it and attest to the fact they definitely saw it. Just as in Portugal, a lot of atheists and communists saw Our Lady when she appeared at Fatima, or sorry, the Miracle of the Sun. So yeah,
They were
regarding
easily
the
converted as well, a lot of them.
yeah, yeah, and I think regarding the Orthodox, it's definitely one of the deeper ones. And like I think of the message as Fatima as something that has it's a lot of people I think want a quick eat, they want instant gratification with this message, and I think with some of them that's behind their demands. Oh, we'll just do this, this, and this, and all this is going to happen. But I think it's a lot deeper than that, a lot broader than that. It has to do with the entire world and the entire um the entire world's relationship with our Lord and our Lady. So I think it's the Orthodox is definitely a part of it. But yeah, it's interesting that it's gone under the radar, really, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean,
Compared to the other parts.
yeah. Apparently, the split with the Orthodox, it I think the some of the at least founding reasons for the split was really basic stuff and simple stuff, and I think a lot of it came down to maybe personal pride between people in the East thought the people in the West were not really listening to them or respecting their particular points of view. Um, but I heard recently, and that I think that same podcast is saying one of the key differences today and why the church leaders down the centuries have prayed for the entire unification of East and West under one Catholic faith, is that one central tenet of Orthodoxy is that it is subservient to the state, whereas Catholicism claims superiority over the state. Now, of course, I mean, in today's day and age, that's clearly not quite the case in practice. It's questionable whether they are truly independent, but at least in theory, Catholicism claims independence and almost superiority over the state, whereas Orthodoxy, I think Metropolitan Kirill in Moscow basically said, yeah, I mean, Putin's in charge and the church is subservient to him, which is obviously not ideal in any case. The church should never be under the state.
Yeah, well, like I suppose I'd wonder how much of that is out of necessity or out of especially in the past 100 years. I mean, the Orthodox was in a tough spot living under communism, and I think the flip side is if you look at the Ukrainian Orthodox Church that's come about in the last few years, they're kind of inclined to be a lot more liberal-minded,
Yes.
but
Yes.
nonetheless, because the state is that way as such, it is problematic, and I think it's been a bit. I don't think the Orthodox have come out too well out of the war that's happening at the minute, because I think they have looked predictable, and they've looked like they don't have a mind of their own. I mean, you're always going to come into a little bit of conflict with the state if you're a proper Christian church or independent minded, but it's it's problematic. I think it's certainly, if you're looking at the message of Fatima, you're kind of thinking, well, what you have in Russia now is a Christianity it's being held up as an example by a lot of people, but a lot of the social problems that were there under communism are still there. Like abortion is still a massive problem in Russia. So, you're kind of, you might be falling into a faith that is it's there to serve a purpose rather than to serve its own purpose. And that could be a problem. Now, I'm not saying that can't happen in Catholic countries, because it has, but I don't know, it's a massive problem. And I think when I was reading the message from Sister Lucia, there's a part further on in her diary where she talks about going to her confessor, and that occurred in 1929, which, if you're thinking, a lot of the messages about priests being killed and so on and so forth, and obviously she was living in Spain at that time, so that would have been prior to the Spanish Civil War. Of course, that was the errors of Russia was the communists in the Spanish Civil War, who get called heroes in Ireland, of course, but but that was but in the message she says, so this is from the 13th of June, 1929. She said, I had sought and obtained permission from my superiors and confessor to make a holy hour from 11 o'clock until midnight every Thursday to Friday. Being alone one night, I knelt near the altar rails in the middle of the chapel and prostrate. I prayed the prayers of the angel. Feeling tired, I then stood up and continued to say the prayers with my arms in the form of a cross. The only light that was that of the sanctuary lamp. Suddenly the whole chapel was illumined by a supernatural light, and above the altar appeared a cross of light reaching to the ceiling. In a brighter light on the upper part of the cross could be seen the face of a man and his body as far as the waist. Upon his breast was a dove, also of light, and nailed to the cross was the body of another man. A little below the waist, I could see a chalice and a large hose suspended in the air, onto which drops of blood were falling from the face of Jesus crucified from the wound inside. These drops ran down onto the host and fell into the chalice. Beneath the right arm of the cross was Our Lady, and in her hand was the Immaculate Heart. It was Our Lady of Fatima, with her Immaculate Heart in her left hand, without sword or roses, but with a crown of thorns and flames. Under the left arm of the cross, large letters, as if of crystal clear water, which ran down upon the altar, formed these words: Grace and Mercy. I understood that it was the mystery of the most holy Trinity which was shown to me, and I received lights about this mystery, which I am not permitted to reveal. Our Lady then said to me, the moment has come in which God asks the Holy Father, in union with all the bishops of the world, to make the consecration of Russia to my Immaculate Heart, promising to save it by these means. There are so many souls whom the justice of God condemns for sins committed against me, that I have come to ask reparation. Sacrifice yourself for this intention and pray. And then she says that our Lord had told her in another vision, they did not wish to heed my request, like the King of France. They will repent and do it, but it will be too late. Russia will have already spread her errors throughout the world, provoking wars and persecutions of the church, and the Holy Father will have much to suffer. And then the footnote talks about I think I said Louis the 16th earlier, but it was Louis the 14th who would have got the original message from St. Margaret Mary regarding like St. Margaret Mary of the Miraculous Medal fame.
Yeah.
So she got the message to say that France had to be consecrated to the Sacred Heart. And Louis the 16th had never heard of this. But he heard of it when he was in prison, but when it was too late for him, then he was obviously executed after that. But so the message anyway is that Sister Lucia kind of warned they have to do this as quick as possible. But see, this is where you get into all the interesting stuff. I mean, look, some of it's the problem with private revelation. Of course, people start, like some people will say, well, they didn't consecrate Russia in 1960 when they should have, because they were afraid of the Russians and what they could do. They were afraid of a backlash. But then other people will say, well, hang on, they did it in 1984 and communism fell. But as we know, the errors are still being spread. So that's the other side of things. I think the problem with this is I think people could be too certain they have it right either way. You know what I mean? People could be too certain either way. Like the world was invited to join in repentance and join in prayer. And it says in Sister Lucia's diary that it'll be done, but it will be late. And it's being done now. It is late, but I mean, people should be hopeful and, prayerful. They shouldn't be always saying God's waiting in the wings to catch us out. I think undoubtedly it's the intention of bishops and the Pope and most people to join in with this in a good way. So I think that's the way people should look at it.
This is a fantastic project, and I'd be praying for its success, as everyone should. And I think it's actually going to, the time that it's happening is 4 p.m. Irish time on Friday. Now, so one thing is that, okay, this is coming about possibly highly. It's okay. Let's get on a brass tacks here. It's because of like the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and possibly one intention of this is to stop the war. Any cessation of people killing other people is, of course, to be welcomed. But of course, what it doesn't seem to take into account is any part of the Russian side. So, I mean, anytime you've had, without wanting to get into the weeds, because this is a really sensitive topic, but what I would suggest, I mean, I suppose in Catholic arena, we're firm believers that you just shouldn't believe what you see on the news, especially what you see on the news is the people who brought in same-sex marriage and abortion. The Russians would say they were defending their interests after 10 years of attacks and killings of some reports say 14,000 ethnic Russians in the Donbass region. So given this logic of stopping countries of killing other people, is there an argument to be made for the consecration of America by the Pope, for example? Given the amounts of wars and invasion and loss of life that have come through American military expeditions around the world.
Yeah. Well, I think the main thing is the fact that Our Lady specifically requested Russia,
Yes.
and she specifically mentioned the errors of Russia. So, my interpretation is that a lot of the problems that America has arose from the errors of Russia. Like, if you were to think to yourself, now, like if you were to think to yourself, a lot of the wars of the late 20th century, I mean, people talk about the military industrial complex of the United States. Would that even have existed if not for communism? Would that even have existed in Vietnam, in Korea, um, were it not for communism?
Yeah, good point.
So it is a chicken and egg situation. I think the big one here is that as Catholics, like I think the big one is just to kind of hope for peace and pray for peace because I think
Definitely.
everybody knows there's of course there's always two sides to every story, but I think like there's the famous story that whether it's true or not that Pius X died just at the beginning of World War One, and there's a story that he was heartbroken before he died because he was seeing what was happening to Europe, and it's kind of I think it's just the only way we can kind of look at what's happening now is that it is heartbreaking, that it's happening to Europe, and she says, Sister Lucia says um, that one of the messages from Our Lady. Um, she says, just one second now. She says, yeah, my intention. Yeah, she says, for I believe I began to plead insistently for the communion of reparation on the first Saturdays and the consecration of Russia. And she says, my intention was to obtain mercy and pardon, not only for the whole world, but for Europe in particular. Um, and you kind of think to yourself, well, Europe, for all reasons, is not only because we live there, um, but it is, Europe's Europe. It is the most important continent in the world, certainly for the past few hundred years. And you just think of what it's been turned into, and you think of what could come next, what's already happened in the past 100 years. I mean, one of the arguments people make for saying John Paul II's consecration was accepted was they'll say, well, we certainly had maybe I don't know, nearly 20 years of peace up to the Iraq War. I know there was the war in the Balkans, um, but relatively speaking, um, but I don't know. I think, yeah, I think it's a very bleak situation. You have people. It's hard to see a good end to this. Like on any
Yeah.
side, and I just think it's Europe just stuck in a cycle of repeating its mistakes and its problems, and it's just completely messy situation. So hopefully the prayer helps, and um, it's good to see. It's good. Like it sounds silly, but it's good to see the Vatican taking the faith seriously, because it's kind of like, well, it's not just all about diplomacy and this and that. I mean, there's other factors that play with all of this stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. And this is one thing, like, in fairness to Pope Francis, maybe he is, and maybe it's a Jesuit thing too. I'm willing to give him the benefit of the doubt on a lot of things because the entire media just they pounce on everything he says, and I think the media amplify what he says according to what they want. Like if they think he says something positive, at least to their mind, about gay marriage, they'll say, "Oh, Pope Francis seems to be open to gay marriage, or women priests." Um, but then recently as well, Pope Francis made a comment about people, and he was probably extremely clear. And he says, "Listen, I'm not talking about couples who can't have children. I'm talking about couples who can have children." He made a point of if you're just having one or two kids, and then you just use contraception for the rest of the marriage, and you get a dog instead of maybe having a few more kids. He said that's I'm paraphrasing. Well, okay, let me say what the media said. They were freaking out because they said that he said people were selfish. Maybe he said that or maybe he didn't. My point is that the media take what Pope Francis says and they kind of spin it to their ends. whether it's actually accurate or not. And like the
Well,
point you made before separately is like this is the first era of Pope's reign when there's been so much attention on him by the internet and all these various channels. So I think we should give him the benefit, not all the time, but at least a lot of time we should give him the benefit of the doubt in terms of how things come out.
yeah, I think with this as well, I mean, it's so sometimes people just have to be a bit more hopeful, I mean, there's people who want to find fault with everything. Like, if he says he's doing it, grand, he's doing it. Like, just leave it at that. Don't be looking for problems. But I think, look, it's an important thing, and hopefully people could join in. And we had a video on our YouTube channel. People might have seen it, which was an old audio recording of Malachi Martin, who was another Jesuit, on the Art Bell show. In the Art Bell was like, my understanding of it, he was like an Alex Jones of the 90s on American radio. And I hope YouTube doesn't censor us now because I mentioned Alex Jones. But he yeah, but the thing about it was he claimed, now I don't know if you can believe all the stuff he said, but he claimed that the final part of the third secret was about 20 years away from when he was talking, which would have been 96, 97, 98. And of course the war in Ukraine really began in 2014, and he said it was about 20 years from when he was talking. But he said Kiev and Russia would be the final part of the third secret. Um, who knows? I don't know. Maybe he knew something, maybe he didn't. But the other thing is the final part of the third secret, which was released in 2000. That was the thing, was that it was claimed that it had already been fulfilled, and so on. And so they claimed, obviously, that Pope John Paul being shot in 1981, I think I have the year right. That was that was on the 13th of May, if I remember correctly. So that means that was connected to Fatima. He was the man in white, but we don't know. I mean, we're getting into this. The thing about Fatima is you can get too far into the private revelation that you spend a lot of it trying to work it out like a puzzle, and then other people start getting into other private revelations that I'm not going to name any of them, but just some of them where they're not accepted by the church as worthy of belief. And so if you're getting into it, what are you getting into it for? Because you're addicted to the thrill of some secret knowledge that other people don't have? Or is it that you're getting into it because you think it's true? Maybe it is. Maybe these other ones are true. But I think that's the danger with all of this. So I would say to people, like, with Fatima, the big thing about a consecration is it's about changing people's hearts, and it's about belief, it's about faith, and it's about people changing their lives around. So I'd say to people, like, don't get too caught up in this isn't Indiana Jones, it's the faith. So I'd say that the biggest message of all the accepted apparitions was conversion, and it was faith, and it was turn your life around, more so than being about secret knowledge. So with the conversion of Russia, that's what people have to focus on.
Yes, exactly. Because the Orthodox thing aside, there's a huge percentage of Russia. Well, not including Ireland as any great example. There's a huge percentage of Russia who are just like atheists and have an atheist outset. It's a holdover from the Cold War. The church, the Christian church, Orthodox Church is definitely coming back in Russia, but Christianity has a long way to come in Russia as well.
Yeah, so let's just hope this has a good effect. I'm sure it will.
Hope and pray. Indeed. Okay, should we wrap it up there?
Yeah, sounds good.
Great. Thanks, Augustine. That was a great talk. And thanks for everyone for listening. Please remember to like this video if you haven't already, and also to subscribe, and also to check us out on our other platforms, Telegram, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Did I miss any, Augustine?
No, that's it.
That's it. Listen, thanks very much. Good night.
See you later.